Hello. First, I want to thank you, Brad, for coming out here to have this debate with me. Now, today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain exactly what my position is. I'm going to say that we do not have enough historical records or historical documents to truly tell us what exactly did happen 2,000 years ago with the death and the potential resurrection of Jesus Christ. The issue here remains that almost all the records that we have were written quite a few decades after the fact. Now, Brad has mentioned before that oftentimes for other historical events, I believe you mentioned Alexander the Great, how we have records dating, historians writing about it hundreds of years after the fact. Part of the issue here is with those events, what we do is we have other forms of evidence besides the actual historical data written down. Namely, we have the actual battles which he fought, we have remnants, we have spears, and we basically can see the destruction which he left in his path, as well as the cultural influence that he brought upon when he traveled through. Now, having this, all we can really say about that is that he really did go through there, and there was some force which came by. We can't actually say the exact details of who he was or what he did, but we simply choose to go with the historian simply because we don't have a better idea. None of the historians say that what is written down is 100% absolutely a fact. With Jesus, though, we have a completely different issue. With Jesus, we have several people writing about him decades after the fact, and no data of what's going on during the time when he lived. His influence in the world is so minimal, we literally don't have records of it. We only have records of the early church, which happened after his already death. What I'm going to say is, I'm going to say that perhaps there's another story. This doesn't have to be the right one, but perhaps it was that there was some person that was attributed to be Jesus, who was a teacher, possibly agreed upon to be some kind of healer of the time, who went around and taught some things that raised some controversy. I'm going to say many of the events listed about it would probably not happen exactly as they are written. If for another reason, then the only records we really have of him until many centuries afterwards are from the church itself, which obviously has a very biased viewpoint on what happens. I'm going to present to you another story. What we do is we have to look at the historical record in the order it came by. We start off with the writings of Paul in 1 Corinthians. He is the first official document we have of what Jesus did after he died. I believe that the writings are historically attributed to be at 55 AD or 53, one of those two dates, which is going to be about 20 years after the death of Jesus Christ. As Brad read before, we have 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8, which states, For what I received I pass on to you as the first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter, and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last, he appeared to me also, as to one abnormally born. Now, what we have to notice here is that he specifically says that Jesus appeared to Paul in much the same way that he appeared to the apostle and to the 500. What's important about this is the time Jesus appeared to Paul would be on the road experience, where he appeared to him not in bodily form, but more of it's a form of a vision. It appeared to him in much the same way that Moses appeared before Jesus, according to the Scriptures, when he went up to the mountaintop. Now, Moses, according to Jewish history, did die bodily. He was not bodily resurrected, and he simply was taken up in a spiritual form. And he appeared to Jesus in a spiritual form, not in a bodily way, much the same way which he appears much the same way that Jesus appears before Paul. So we do know that Jews at the time did have some semblance of the idea of a spiritual resurrection. We also know that they did not always agree on the type of resurrection we have, namely because at one point in the Bible, it comes by when the Jews are talking to Jesus and they're asking him, are you the resurrected form of John the Baptist? So they're not seeing John the Baptist as he would have been physically, bodily resurrected, but that he would be a new man through some kind of spiritual influence. Now, exactly how this works, I cannot say, but it is clear that this was not a bodily resurrection they expected of John the Baptist, so they do have other forms other than bodily resurrection. Now, what else you can notice is that if you actually go on in 1 Corinthians 2:21, Paul also says, For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead comes also through a man. So he's talking about the resurrection of some form of a group of men, And while a traditional historical argument traditional Christian viewpoint would say that this would be the resurrection of humankind in the end, possibly at rapture, what he meant at the time is, again, not too clear, but once again, we can be pretty sure he is not talking about bodily resurrection, as he's not going to be expecting all of us or the followers of Jesus at the time to be bodily resurrected. Now, if we move on further down through time, some of the next writings that did not come from Paul would have actually come from the Gospel of Mark. And this happens sometime in the late 60s to early 70s. And if you look at the very end of Mark, to Mark chapter 16, verses 5 through 8, it reads and he's talking about after Jesus' death. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be afraid," he said. "You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? But go, tell his disciples and Peter he is going ahead of you into Galilee, where you will see him just as he told you." And then it ends. Now, Mark does have some verses after this, but these are not found in the earliest manuscripts of Mark that we have, and it are assumed that they were added at some later point. So what we can really go is the original writings only have this verse. As you notice, it says nothing about him really appearing before the disciples, appearing before 500 men. All it really says is that he is dead, that his body is missing, and nothing else. You would think that, if you're writing the gospel, you would take into account some of the most important stories about him coming back, anything that he said afterwards. Yet it is surprisingly quiet about anything that it says. The idea of what actually happens to him, about how he appears before multitudes, doesn't appear until other writings. I believe it first appears in the Gospel of Matthew, which is written about 15 years after the book of Mark.